Howdy, guys. Oh god. I have the sudden undying urge to lose all self-worth. I should pick up game development. Done. Well, now I've lost all my self-worth. Hopefully I can rush this out to all hell, then do a yearly series, and eventually I start to make some kind of— This is how sin is made!
As my English teacher once told me, you have to have a rough draft before you make a final copy. She was also senile, so I don't trust anything that woman says, but the main takeaway here is that prototypes are integral to the game-making process. I mean, the concept is as simple as it sounds. Would you like this to be every game you play?
This is what happens when free will is legal!
To any old game dev out there, prototypes are just mementos of their work, but to the outsider it can open a window into what could have been. These old builds could be seen through many mediums like trailers and downloadable demos. However, with the advent of the internet, it's become much easier to find them. Almost every year now, some major game gets its prototype leaked, with them either being sold to prestigious collectors or they're donated to game preservationists who then document and dump their files on websites like the Cutting Room Floor and Hidden Palace. Some games don't change much over development, but other times they don't even look recognizable to the final product. That's why I like to talk about some prototype builds of games that I find to be quite interesting, and maybe some that I don't. Who knows what we'll see.
But I swear to God, if I don't see a dying dog by the end of this, I'm gonna be pissed.
I like to place prototypes into a few categories. First, we have the boring ones. These are usually from right before the game releases and have very little changes between the final version, which is not what I'm looking for today. So we move on to the next category, early builds of games that usually take place much earlier in development, so not a lot of the game's concepts have been finalized, meaning they're quite different. But then we have the most interesting ones, early builds of games that never released. Most of the time, these are the only way these games can ever be seen. I think it gives a great insight into how some of the more popular games came to be. So let's begin with a slightly interesting prototype. Everybody knows Dr. Mario, right? That charming little puzzle game that was your contingency plan if you didn't have a copy of Tetris on you that somehow got way more sequels and spin-offs than it honestly deserved? Well, this build of the game showcases many development quirks of Dr. Mario. For one, the name. Yeah, the game went by the name Virus for most of its development. I assume Mario didn't have enough real estate on the NES as it was. Another funny thing is that it was actually built off of Tetris for the NES, as it controls very similarly, and this prototype even uses the same sound effects. Other than that, it is very basic. There's no music, only the Tetris sound effects, and the menus and levels are really bare. Mario himself and the viruses use an early design, and in place of the petri dish with the viruses in it is a nurse taking care of a sick dog.
Called it.
There is another proto known as the PlayChoice 10 prototype, which gets its name from the fact that it was found on a PlayChoice 10 arcade machine. These are just collections of NES games put onto an arcade board. It's certainly a lot closer to the final version, but the reason I mention it is to highlight an odd business practice of Nintendo's. The reason that this prototype appeared on an arcade board is supposedly because Nintendo of America actually owned a few Chuck E. Cheese franchises at the time where these PlayChoice 10 machines appeared. It's rumored that Nintendo would actually test upcoming NES games on the public using these arcade machines.
I feel so bad for those virus enthusiasts who never knew that the game of their dreams was right under their noses. Well, we always have Dr. Damn It every time.
Speaking of games built off of other games, here's a prototype of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I remember playing Sonic 2 on my Wii and then my 3DS, so I'm excited to pick up my Genesis copy for use in this segment. Oh.
Ah, jeez, I just forgot I don't own a copy of Sonic 2. Or a Genesis. Or a Sega console of any kind. Damn, if only I knew a guy who owned Sonic 2 and had black hair. Oh, I got it!
What the hell? What the f do you want, Ryle?
Sorry, Colton, from the KGR.7 channel. I just wanted to know more about those Sonic 2 prototypes out there. Think you could lend a hand?
Alright. Whoa! Okay, what do you want to talk about first? Do you want to talk about the Sonic 1 prototype that has been lost for over 30 years? Or do you want to talk about the Sonic 3 prototype that uses the PC soundtrack without Michael Jackson? Or do you want to talk about something about Genocide City Zone? Did you notice those bushes in Sonic Adventure are different in the GameCube version?
Okay, that's enough. I just want to know more about the Sonic 2 Nick Arcade prototype.
Oh, alright. The name stems from the fact that it seems to be very similar or exactly the same as an early build of the game as seen on a few episodes of Nick Arcade, a game show that ran on Nickelodeon. Interesting thing to note is that Sonic 2 was built off the original Sonic the Hedgehog. As such, this build has a lot of Sonic 1 data left over, such as the music and sound effects. If you just played the prototype normally, you're given an early version of Emerald Hill Zone to play. And for whatever reason, there is this stupid mechanic where if you dash into a wall at full speed, you get knocked down to your ass, which is quite counterintuitive for a Sonic game. Unfortunately, after beating the boss, you're just sent back to the title screen. However, if you use the level select code on the title screen, you can access the rest of the available levels, and man is this ever a prototype. The entirety of Green Hill Zone from Sonic 1 is still here, but the graphics and collision are all screwed up, as well as some unfinished Sonic 2 levels, alongside quite a famous scrapped level, Hidden Palace Zone. There's not a lot known about this stage, other than it appears to be an underground cavern similar to Mystic Cave Zone, and that it is incomplete. The level's legacy would live on through the 2013 remaster, albeit with some slight changes. Oh, and Hilltop Zone crashes the entire game at a certain point in the level, so that's lovely. Also,
What's wrong?
I think I'm having a heart attack.
Oh, poor guy must have been so tuckered out from all those Sonic 2 prototypes. Well, that's fine. I never asked him about Sonic Extreme. I'm
Sonic Extreme's development is a story way too convoluted to tell, but let me give you the rundown. Sonic Extreme was meant to be Sonic's big jump into 3D, a la Mario 64, but for the Sega Saturn. However, development took a major nosedive with conflicting ideas, corporate disputes, and developer fatigue, which led to the game's cancellation. The only way to view the game nowadays is to look through old promos and E3 demos, but there's also a few prototype ROMs that have leaked in the year since it was cancelled. One of these is a PC prototype, which I can't play due to me having the Fruit computer, but there is a Saturn prototype that can be played through emulators. It's very basic, with only one level and a small one at that. Some hills, some rings, no sound effects, and reused music from Sonic CD, but this does give us a great insight into this game, specifically the art style. I really like how classic Sonic looks in 3D, and it's a shame we didn't see it more often. Now, one of the most famous prototypes out there is the 2003 build of Half-Life 2. The reason it's so famous was actually because this build was stolen and leaked online over a year before the game would even release. This was such a huge scandal for Valve that it almost led to the entire game being cancelled. Obviously that never happened, and nowadays this prototype is well known for being very different from the final game. Being that this is from a year before it came out, it's a given that they made some huge changes before the final release. There's cut weapons, characters, and even full sections of the game and storyline are absent. It's also generally unpolished, with visual glitches and unfinished assets being common. But what this prototype offers is probably one of the best insights into one of the best video game stories of all time. The game was supposed to be much darker than the final, with the Combine not only invading Earth, but even start taking the planet's resources, like replacing the air with toxic gases and draining the oceans. On top of this, there are many leftovers from the original Half-Life, like models and menus. Now, in addition to this prototype, a lot more information could be found in the book Half-Life 2: Raising the Bar, which gives a great insight into the development with concept art and developer interviews. If you want to learn more about the development of Half-Life 2, I suggest picking this up.
Well, that was certainly an interesting prototype. Maybe companies should get hacked more often. But before I get to my final prototype, I want to give a few honorable mentions to some prototypes that aren't exactly that noteworthy, but I thought I'd mention anyways. What, that's not original? F you, I'm unpredictable!
First, I'd like to mention the Super Mario Bros. 2 prototype. What I like about this one is that it still has a lot of assets left over from Doki Doki Panic. There's leftover items, menus, and even the money system. It also has some really good underground music that went unused for some reason. Another honorable mention goes to the Crash Bandicoot prototype. It's the earliest known prototype of the game, which means it has plenty of cut and placeholder content, different fonts, placeholder loading, and game over screens, and even an unused test leveler in this prototype. The core gameplay is the same, but I do find it at least somewhat interesting. There's also all those prototypes of rare games that got cancelled, but I think that's a story for another day. So instead, my final honorable mention goes to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. At this point in development, they were trying to get a feel of how an open world Zelda game would work, so they created this proto based off of the original Legend of Zelda to then use to create the final game. It's not much, but it's nice to see where they came from. But now we get to our final prototype. Put your hands together for Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights.
Trust me.
Yeah, I'm being serious when I say that this has to be one of the most interesting prototypes I've ever seen. For some context, Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights is a 3D platformer that released in 2002 for the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. It was developed by Heavy Iron Studios, the same guys who made SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. Now, I assume some of you already knew that, as it is a pretty decent platformer, but what most of you probably don't know is that its development actually started all the way back on the original PlayStation. This prototype was made back in October of the year 2000, and it's basically a totally different game, with almost everything in this prototype being scrapped. For one, the cutscenes. In the final game, they're made using 3D animation, but in this prototype, with the exception of the intro, it's actually animated using hand-drawn animation with a completely different story to boot. Secondly, the gameplay is different. It's more of an auto-runner, I think. The levels themselves are actually FMVs that the models are placed over, which I think is cool. However, it's barely playable, and I can't seem to beat any of the levels. All I can seem to do is move left, right, and jump. Your health decreases over time for some reason, and it obviously seems unfinished. Half of the cutscenes take place in levels that either don't exist or the cutscenes are just missing, and the game is mostly silent. It's also pretty buggy, with one of the levels actually crashing the game partway through, as well as general collision issues throughout. So it's obvious that they must have shifted development on the more powerful PS2 hardware pretty early on and effectively restarted development from scratch. Then again, I think that must have been for the better, as I much prefer the standard 3D platformer. Regardless, it's still amazing to see how drastically the game changed in its development, and had this prototype not been released, we would have never known that. Now, usually this is the part where I say what happened to the concept of prototypes over the years, but honestly not much has changed. It's such a basic part of game making that it doesn't need to change. However, a new form of prototype has become relevant thanks to the internet, that being the early access game. These are most prevalent in indie games, but they're essentially playable prototypes. When the game is eventually finished, you feel like you're part of the development process.
Prototypes are certainly important when making games, but they're also pretty fun to look at and just see all the little differences. It really makes you appreciate how some games are made. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go play some Dr. F***. It's a conspiracy, I tell ya.